15 years ago, I was invited to come to Brazil the first time for Typografia Brasilis. And it was then when I first met the first speaker of today. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to Claudio Rocha, who will open this conference with a fantastic keynote talk. So pay attention because I'm going to ask you some questions. Claudio, please.
Okay, I'm going up. It's better. Thank you. I'm really glad to open this conference and take part of this conference in Brazil. Today I'm going to talk about expressions of quality, and I'll start an overview of the ATypI conferences. Well, starting in 1996, I was nominated the Brazilian delegate of ATypI. I was delegate since 2006, when I first moved to Italy, where I'm living now. And this event was the beginning of a process that enrolled a group of Brazilian obstinate designers and led us to this conference here in São Paulo. The conference was held in The Hague at the Royal Academy of Art in the Netherlands, a traditional center of excellence in typography. In the following years, I could testify how this group of talented and generous people pushed the boundaries of the typography field. So, on the left, the logo of Reading Conference, whose theme was typography and language. Next was Multitypo in Lyon, when Adrian Frutiger was interviewed on stage. It was really outstanding, share this, be there. In 1999, ATypI was in North America, and the next year in Leipzig. The Leipzig conference was held at the Museum of Printing Arts, and the logo was created by our fellow Adam Twardok, he's here today. And after he did that, after some initial designs by Eric Spiekermann. Next year was in Copenhagen, 2001, and then Rome with the shape of language theme. Vancouver conference had a mascot, and the theme was between text and reader. Prague, the crossroads of civilizations. Helsinki, on the edge. Lisbon, typographic journeys. The Lisbon logo was created by Mário Feliciano. The paragraph mark evocates the early Portuguese expeditions. I really like this symbol. Next was Brighton in 2007 and St. Petersburg 2008. Mexico City, the theme was the heart of the letter on the left, and then Dublin, the word. Iceland, the letter ed, which is in use in Icelandic, has been chosen to express the theme of the conference, which was the additional letters. Between black and white, ATypI met the Asian people in Hong Kong. Nice idea. Amsterdam, the theme was point, counterpoint, and the logo was created by Studio Dunbar. It's a really good design studio in Amsterdam. Typographic dialogues in Barcelona, and the visual identity by the designer Mario Eskenazi. And both logos play with the initials of each city. And then ATypI arrived in São Paulo. I would like to talk about a little of the idea, the concept of this visual identity. The city is already known to some of our friends from the typographic community, and who were here before to take part of the ATypI and Typocracia conferences. Our logo was created by Christian Cruz, type designer, teacher, graphic designer from Curitiba. Christian, I believe, is here. Thanks, Christian. You did a very good job. The visual identity is focused on the phonetic transcription. So why? The sound is particular to the Portuguese language, and luckily is present in the name São Paulo. Also, the sound is the hardest one for non-native speakers. So we wanted an visual identity of the conference.
São Paulo. São Paulo. São Paulo.
In Sao Paulo.
São Paulo.
In Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo.
In São Paulo.
In Sao Paulo.
São Paulo de
São Paulo. São Paulo. São Paulo.
São Paulo. São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo de São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo. São Paulo. São Paulo. São Paulo. São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo.
In São Paulo.
In Sao Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo.
In Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo. São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo. São Paulo.
São Paulo.
In São Paulo.
São Paulo. São Paulo.
São Paulo. In São Paulo.
São Paulo.
São Paulo.
Em São Paulo.
São Paulo.
Sao Paulo.
São Paulo.
We did that last year in Barcelona. So here we have the sign isolated, design side isolated. Below we have the phonetic transcription of the city's name with the sound Thus it became the base for the conference symbol. Brackets are also a component of phonetics. So they were added to identity as well to be used in some applications. Christian also found in the tilde an opportunity to enhance the personality of the visual identity. And by coincidence, one of the symbols of the city is the Copan building, designed by the architect Oscar Niemeyer, which floor plan has exactly the shape of a tilde. So the shape was extracted to be used in the conference symbol. So we have to thank also Niemeyer. This is the final symbol. Christian have chosen the Solido typeface from DS Type, kindly donated by its designers, Dino dos Santos and Pedro Leal. But he had to work on the shape of the upside-down glyph A to avoid any undesirable similarity with the letter E. Basically, he added a curved spur. The sign was positioned between slash, usual in phonetic notation. The logo with the theme, challenges. We are also grateful to Rafael Deitch, author of Brasilica, and also Ana Megda and Pablo German, designers of Voces, both fonts with phonetic glyphs seen in your badges and booklet. We also have ACTA symbols time from DS Type for the timetable. Thanks again, Dino. So, as stated in the talk's description, we are going to discuss how to convey efficiency, both in communicating the content and responding to aesthetic values. The concept of quality is subjacent and is fundamental to answer those two questions: how to attribute quality and how to produce quality. Some things are better than others or have more quality. And comparison involves judgment. As the semiologist Charles Peirce said, every judgment expresses a relation of ideas and a thinking to them together. I would add, every expression of an idea reflects a personal choice, which embodies an opinion. And returning to the graphic field, when someone chooses a specific font and arrange it in a given space, he or she is making a visual statement. So which expresses an opinion based on an individual repertoire. Talking about quality in type design. It's usual listen people saying, I hate Arial. Okay, it's an opinion and must be respected. But any opinion should be authenticated by reasonable justifications. It's easy to say that this font sucks, or it's ugly, or use any vague attribute. But how to identify any lack quality and how to judge a project? What would be the problem with Arial, Comic Sans, or any other font that fell into disgrace among graphic designers? It would be helpful to take into account three aspects. The first is the quality of idea. Taking Arial and Helvetica as example, which font idea is better? Which is founded on a better idea of a font? We can say that in this case, the quality of idea is not directly related to the fonts themselves. Helvetica and Arial are redesigns and were born under marketing premises. Arial started life as a bitmap font for IBM in 1982, while Helvetica was created in the 50s and became notorious and used by the Swiss School of Design in the 60s. Arial suffers with prejudice, but Helvetica also has its own problems. It's not a unanimity. A quite different situation is the idea of creating a font based on a chancery cursive that took up less space than Roman, allowing to produce cheaper and practical books in smaller formats during the Renaissance. So it was really a change. The second aspect to be considered is the quality of the drawing. In this case, both fonts have roots on industrial sans serif typefaces from the 19th century. Arial is based on monotype grotesque, metal type, and Helvetica was done with a mix of grotesques. In the end, for untrained eyes, their shapes are quite similar in small font formats. Here, you are talking about combining straight and curved lines to create the shape of a letter, which must refer to the sign whose sound is intended to be translated. Beyond the legibility or efficiency in communicating, the letter shapes must ratify the idea in visual terms and responding to aesthetics. Eric Gill summarizes the importance of a good drawing. Good lines, clear lines, firm lines, lines you intend. I've got this taught as a lesson. Gill took up the engraving letters on wood instead of drawing them on paper. And this, in the end, led him to pictorial engraving. So he was a master. His way is carved in wood, in stone. It's just impressive. This is a title page, and he designed also the letters. Eric Gill was obstinate to the point of fanaticism, and his drawings and engravings show nothing but quality in essence. He was a skilled artist, capable of engraving on wood and carving on stone. The third aspect refers to the implementation in a font format file. Arial, for instance, rendered better than on screen at small point sizes on Windows systems than Helvetica does, due to a rigorous hinting process. And on the other hand, Helvetica in the 80s was redesigned and launched as Neue Helvetica. Now the family has more than 50 styles. Maybe you could say this could help to explain its popularity. We can say that a font is a product that has no physical properties, usually delivered online to the customer. At this point, the user shows up on the other side of the screen. Yes, the end user is a designer, is in the design field as the same as the type designer. Now, this is a special condition. He or she could be a skilled, well-trained graphic or web designer that honors the work of the type designer. But if he or she is a maniac dilettante, this could be a problem, but better don't think about it. Didactically speaking, letters are the smaller unit in a written message. they don't work alone, mostly. They usually appear in pairs or syllables, the second unit, to form words, the third and most emblematic unit. We can quote Matthew Carter, who said, "The type designer is not a designer of letters, it's a designer of words." So the design of each letter must be well balanced and properly positioned. In former days, there were a lot of constraints, but today, OpenType programming leaves no excuse for poor font implementation. This helps a lot when you are a designer, a graphic designer. So you have to take advantage of it. Continuing, we have the text line as the fourth unit, which usually appears in groups to form a paragraph, both with their formal needs. From this point, the responsibility goes to the graphic designer, who must take good care also of the sixth unit, the column, which in some situations is replicated to form the seventh unit, the page. Looking at this spread, any type designer would cite. We all know that today it's easier to create this kind of effect using graphic softwares, but at that time it was a demanding task. Most important in this spread, however, is the way Stork used the graphic effect to serve his idea. It's really clever. Another outstanding example. A single choice on how to display a book title and choosing the background colors can make a difference. Here, Robert Massin crossed the boundaries of the front cover to create a timeless design, which really works as a silent teacher. Here we have an intriguing story. I was caught by this idea of having these strange signs in the fields. They are called crop circles. Crop circle is a pattern created by flattening a crop, usually a cereal, mainly in England, but they can be found everywhere. Crop circles have a strong symbology, but we don't know their meaning. Scholars relate some of them with Kabbalah symbols or galaxy formations, for instance, but most of them remain obscure and are open to interpretation. But above all, I was caught by their graphic structure. This phenomenon was first described in the 18th century in England. Probably the most renowned is the Mowing Devil case in 1678, in which a farming field was said to have been visited by a devilish entity that trampled the crops down in a circle. Some of them are big and really complex. You can see people inside this formation. The wheat stems are carefully folded very close from the ground. These bands do prevent the ears of wheat from growing and will be able to be harvested normally. Some say and try to prove this is impossible to be done by human beings. Who knows? So, this amazing circle resembles an electromagnetic field. This one has a very complex geometrical construction. It appeared suddenly in the middle of the night, but its realization would demand much more time than a single night. It doesn't matter if they were made by aliens or hoaxers. They are really beautiful and powerful. Anyway, other eyes are needed to look at these drawings in wheat fields, with its pure and intricate forms, and exercise what still remains of our capacity in being surprised by magic. Our eyes are getting used to more sophisticated images produced by computer graphics and conveyed in film and media. Daily, our brain processes these fantastic images and should constantly distinguish what is real from what is a simulation of reality. Sand is not unusual as a medium for letters. I bet all of you already wrote something in the sand, to the sand, you know. It was just funny. But this guy, Andrew van der Werf, for the past 8 years, a self-proclaimed beach scriber, has been creating beautiful calligraphy in the sands of Cape Town, South Africa. He created a special instrument that looks like a gigantic four-sided cheese grater on a stick without the holes, to carve stunning patterns into the sand. Wearing shoes that are like small skateboards without wheels that prevent him from leaving footprints in the sand. He gently steps around his designs, working from the inside out. Andrew has a particular penchant for carving ancient and modern scripts into the sand, and then photographing the picturesque scene before it's swept away with the wind and tide. As he states, the work is usually very temporal, often lasting no more than an hour before it is taken by the wind and the tide. Most of the forms he uses draw their inspiration from African writing systems. But in some instances, he has moved on from there and found himself playing with the variations of a particular movement, pretty much like a musician who might play with variations on a theme. Also, he explored the difference and the different texture on the seashore. It looks like a painting. Similar to the stone-carved inscriptions, these forms take advantage of the sunlight. But sometimes an extra feature is added, the action of the seawater. Another special feature, different layers of sand. As I said, Andrew is a professional calligrapher. Here he paid homage to Hermann Zapf. Bispo do Rosário, he was a Brazilian. This man was not an artist, but his production was outstanding and highly sophisticated from the aesthetic point of view. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and spent his last decades on a mental institution. We can clearly identify and attribute a high degree of quality to his work. But his ambitions were not the same of an artist, for instance, like Marcel Duchamp. He was not doing art, he was not questioning anything. He was just expressing himself by religious purposes, which was, he wanted to take his objects with him before God on the judgment day. Bispo patiently sealed his words. And these letters were captured in a font by the Brazilian designer Amir Adimoni. Amir also reproduced the characteristic sealed underline in two versions, regular and bold. This is interesting. This colloquial sentence found on a wall here in São Paulo was badly spell written by a semi-literate person. It conveys a single advice, which could be translated as, "Do not place letter here, please, write." The word breaks are wrong, and also the letters Q, you can see on the right side, have a wrong shape. They are not meant to be letters G. I'd like to point out that besides the evident lack of any cultural background, this person chose to use the use of dots to separate words, in the same way the Romans did in their inscriptions. Here, in some cases, there's no space to place the dots. So he had to use his intuition to find a solution to convey the message properly and try to preserve its integrity. Now, we have Fortunato De Pero, is an Italian futurist, which early in his career embraced the futurist movement. This book, named De Pero Futurista, also known as the Bolted Book, was published in 1927 and is one of the first examples of book as an art object. It was a tool for promoting his work, summarizing 14 years of futurist activity in the form of a book. This is one of the pages of this book, where he stressed the futuristic typography. Here, the letters are upside down, but the reading is okay, from left to right. We can read in Italian, De Pero glorified by Marinetti. To achieve this effect, he inverted the order of the letters in hand composition and also inverted the sequence of the lines in mounting the form. Maybe a mistake he embodied, maybe not. In this book, we also found some illustrations, some examples of advertising jobs. He used to play with black and white intersection, both in drawing and in letters. Here he follows the simplified silhouettes and angular letters in the Art Deco style. Another example of this style, the shape of the letter A reflects the angular forms of the letter M, also present on the top of the head, both mixing black and white. These posters were produced by De Pero in different times and show different solutions. The lettering on the left is more conventional and works as a caption for the image. But we find here some symbiotic ligatures, while the Macy's lettering is dynamic, with angular letters that fit organically the space left by the illustration, by changing the inclination and the baseline. I isolated the letterings from the original context to better perceive their shapes. In Macy's, the apostrophe was incorporated to the letter F, S. And in Strato Café, the letter R was slanted to fit its neighbor's shape, and the FF ligature is very ingenuous. In this cover from 1927, De Pero broke the verticality of the letters, both on masthead and titles, rotating them freely. In the year numbers, he combined intersection, floating layers, and tri-dimensional figures. These posters for Straga Drink is another example of adaptability. The inclined and elongated bar of the letter G fills the white space and became a special feature in this lettering. Anyway, the sketch shows better counterforms, while a better solution was found for the space above the letter R, also intersecting the shapes. And this letter style was reproduced in a font by P22 named Il Futurismo. Well, futurism was fundamental among the European avant-garde movements in the beginning of the 20th century. Futurists treat the words not only as image, but also as sound, in the concept of free word, in Italian, parola libera. Here you have an example of concrete poetry. We have another talk, maybe tomorrow, I believe. João Bandeira talk about Augusto de Campos, an incredible visual poet, Brazilian. In here, this poem named Velocity explores the visual rhythm of the words. A highly refined drawing in Art Deco style. The numbers by Romain de Tirtoff, a Russian-born French artist and designer known by the pseudonym RT, from the French pronunciation of his initials. RT was a talented 20th century artist and designer who flourished in an array of fields, including fashion, jewelry, graphic arts, costume and set design for film, theater, and opera, and also interior decor. You can say he's a monster. He also designed an alphabet, really beautiful. It's easy to find on internet. The case of Curven Press. Harold Curven was one of the pioneering figures in the technical revolution that transformed the printing industry during the second quarter of the 20th century in Britain. He joined the family business in 1908, and Curven Press was a prosperous printing shop near London, concentrated mainly on the publication of religious music printed matter. The young Harold started as an unpaid assistant in the company, inspired by the arts and crafts ideals, absorbed when enrolled at Central School of Arts. There, he learned calligraphy under Edward Johnston, a pioneer in the reform of typography. Johnston and his fellows inspired a generation of young men for whom fine printing became a sort of holy grail. Curven became the director of the company 3 years later. In those days, printing was it was a practical business, and aesthetics played no part. So he had to progress with caution in persuading the old hands with his new ideas. Soon he put the company in the vanguard of offset lithography on fine color printing. He described himself as a rebel against commercial ugliness. They produced a carefully designed series of newsletters. This one was created by Eric Ravilius. And his ideals led him to be a founder member of the Design Industries Association. Among its most active leaders were Frank Peake of London Underground and Joseph Thorpe, a publicist and writer who became consultant of the press. He produced a lot of underground posters. One of the Thorpe's first innovations was the suggestion of a printer's sign, a unicorn. Several artists were invited to create a version of the symbol. This one was engraved by Eric Gill. We can see here the cover of one of the type specimens from Curven Press. Simon Oliver, who was a key figure in this company, arrived in 1919 to take care of the commercial area and soon became partner of the company with the specific charge of bringing book business to the press. They established an office in central London in the same building of the Cloister Press, managed by Stanley Morrison. Simon's office became an international meeting house for anyone interested in typography and in the art of printing. It was there that the typographical journey, the Fleuron, was conceived, both by Morrison and Simon. More than a regular print shop, the Curvin Press brought expertise in producing books, and in commercial printed matter. They produced an amazing variety of work, labels, trade cards, books, posters, pattern papers, etc. And this spread shows Maximilian Antiqua, a font made by Rudolf Koch in 1914. This is a postcard made for the 1931 calendar designed by Barnett Friedman. At the background, on the upper right side, we can identify the Maximilian Antiqua. The list of artists who worked for the press comprises over than 200 painters, draftsmen, and engravers, among them Eric Gill, Claude Louvat-Fraser, and McKnight Coffer, besides Barnett Friedman. Those initials were designed by Jan van Krippen for the press. Beautiful letters. You can see the letter Q, which amazing tail. This is Curvin Sans Serif, designed by Harold himself in 1911 and cast in 1928. It shows a strong influence of London underground type, created by Harold's teacher, Edward Johnston. I used this book as a reference. I could understand how important is receiving a proper stimulus, and then, as Harold Curvin did, create self-stimulus. I want to finish this showcase with a famous example of achievement of pure quality. Herbert Lubalin was one of the most influential graphic designers of all times. His logotypes, ads, and editorial designs were among the most incensed works in the graphic design history. He managed perfectly the spatial relation between forms and counterforms. In his letterings for titles and logos, Lubalin always searched and found the perfect solution in balancing the white spaces and discovering the specific subject in the composition to convey originality. Some of the ligatures he created came from lettering practice, like the interweaving of letters, as you can see here in the double O. But here the ampersand is the key sign with elongated tail. Contemplating his works is just a lesson of visual thinking. And most of his ideas were rested on napkins. And then in New York, since 1985, the Lubalin Study Center preserved Herbert Lubalin's work and his vast collection, providing the design community with a means to study his innovative work. Here we have expressive typography applied in a page of a calendar. We can see in detail the perfect letter spacing, creating a well-balanced pattern. His illustrative typography and his groundbreaking work can be seen in an avant-garde magazine cover from the 60s. And the magazine logo inspired the production of a typeface, named ITC Avant-Garde Gothic, which was one of the first typeface families released by ITC in 1907. Tom Carnays drew the alphabet based on Lubalin's sketches. A complete version of ITC Avant-Garde Gothic was launched recently with all the original characters and ligatures. So, that is it.